Yes, yes, yes.
Don't make me
Yes, yes. We're kind of based in Barcelona. So,
you still got an office?
yeah, it's small. It's based on living. Yeah, I see her there. Both of them trying to get her to move.
I was in Barcelona last year, filming, so
It's kind of nice.
I started. Okay.
It's
It's lagging, obviously.
Yeah. No, it
not
looks
in
better,
Europe.
right? It's
It looks good, yeah.
like this. I put more spotlight.
Ooh, yeah, my first few. Yeah.
But it's, yeah, not complex.
Oh my god. Good luck. I know you're prepping. I'll talk to you. Okay.
It's complex. Not that it has the way. It's reading. Kind of. One of the complicated. I mean, there's a lot of positive things. It still needs
no.
You were here? Good. How long have you been here? Where is it? You don't hang out? She's teaching at Parsons.
No, I don't. I'll get
She's very good friend. So good to see you. You're doing well. I'm always proud of you. I want to see you. No, it's really nice. You're one of the very positive.
sitting in the bathroom. Yeah. Are you there? I'm still doing it.
Take a stool and sit here, then I won't disturb
Maybe
anybody.
not here. You can maybe sit in the front.
And the last day I was talking to
You can also, these seats are
checking how she's doing in China.
Only because we're live streaming.
Yeah.
We
After you half Chinese, half Lebanese. See? Not only that. Yeah, she told me she's also with Tatiana was very
Do you want to call it?
Good. Annabelle left. He's not living in Barcelona. No, he was like till the last minute he was staying. He hates me. And that's why I don't end up doing so much. But last minute I said, maybe I should have gone because you should have gone. But he said he would come back when the other But we've been traveling a lot. So. I haven't been to Barcelona since like November. So I need to come back. I've been out from the guys in the office. You know Jinan, was she coming? Yeah, Jinan is a photographer. She's doing kind of everything. She's very nice. Let me introduce you to Haza. Haza. Parsons student, Parsons faculty. If you can download
It is a small one.
it's a small word.
I am. Yes. Okay.
Like, I think 2017, we had like when we were in Germany at the
No, 2017. No, before.
or 2017.
Was I visiting Germany or was I living in Germany? Okay, so before 2015.
Yeah, I made them from it.
Okay.
It's like talking about
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
The big now here.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But now we've been able to present.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, now today's program is strategic design management. Yes. That's also a master's for undergrad.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, I'll get in touch with you after this talk. Once you get to
You ready to start?
Yeah, it's going to be like musical chairs.
Okay. Nadine, can you do some tests? Can you test the mic? Yes. Speak into it, make sure it sounds good. Turn it on.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. And
Can
continue.
you ask the back if
Guys at the back, do you hear me okay? Yes? We're only testing, so you can still do other stuff. I think we start in a minute or so. Okay, good. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll get clear.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Book Arts. My name is Carlee Reynolds. I'm the executive director here. How many of you are here for the first time? I know if you've been here before. Oh my gosh, okay, great. If you've been here before, you've seen me do this before. It's just really nice to see so many new faces at the Center for Book Arts. So welcome. Let me tell you a little bit about what we do here. The Center for Book Arts has, since 1974, promoted the active explorations of artistic practices related to the book as an art object. We have done this by providing access to equipment, processes, studio space, teaching classes, collecting, and basically empowering artists to be able to make their own books. There's something really magical about printing something, about creating something, and seeing it realized as your own publication and being able to share it in the world. And that's what I think is really special about design as well. It's something that you have full control over. You can use it in any way to express your own thoughts, your feelings, your political ideas, and you can get that out of the world. And one of the things that I think is really special about Arabic typography in particular is how flexible it is. I mean, it has the ability to bring great impact just through the contemporary, bold, geometric aspects of what it can do. And at the same time, it can be so poetic. And so poetic to the point where someone who doesn't read it maybe would have a hard time even understanding that it's language. And I think that that's really just absolutely powerful and beautiful. So tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about contemporary Arabic graphic design and looking at the way that artists are using this form now. I also should make a note to you all that we are live streaming this tonight, and we are doing this not only to make sure that people who are not here in the room tonight have access to this, but so that we can preserve and just create an additional document of all of the amazing research and work that people have been doing over the years has a place to exist on the internet, and it will be on our site in the future as well. So, and additionally, as I mentioned on Thursday, because this is the second of our panels, the work does not stop here. We are here to learn, to apply the given knowledge to the future here at the center in our programming. We are excited to share this with our members who are here in the audience, with the residents who work in our studios on a daily basis, the scholarship students, instructors, practitioners, board members, daily visitors. And we hope that everyone who's here tonight will be able to apply something that they learned to their own personal practice. I want to take a moment to thank our members, our board of directors, and our founder, who are all here tonight. And also our supporters. This series is supported in part by the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of Andrew Cuomo and the New York State Legislature, and by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with City Council. And now it is my pleasure to welcome our curator of this series and just someone who's become one of my favorite people. Dr. Nadine Chahine is an award-winning Lebanese type designer and a principal at Arabic Type Limited. She has a master's in typeface design from the University of Reading, UK, and PhD from Leiden University in the Netherlands. She has numerous awards, including 2 awards of excellence in type design from the Type Directors Club. And the list of typefaces that she's designed is impressive, and I'll let you ask her about that list after the talk. Everyone, let's give Nadine a warm welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, and hello, everyone watching us
on Facebook or watching us afterwards. Thank you a lot. I am very happy to be in front of you today. We have an excellent lineup of speakers. I'm super excited to hear from all three of them. Also super excited that I don't have to present today. So I'm just like you, I'm just going to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Yeah, the theme of the panels that we've had revolve around the use of typography in communication. So in the first panel, we talked about modernity, the concepts of modernity in Arabic type design. Today, we're looking at a more applied aspect of that, and we're looking at contemporary Arabic graphic design. In the next panel, we're going on, which will be on the 19th, so in a little bit less than 2 weeks, we will be talking about heritage and technology when it comes to Arabic type. So we're really exploring all of these different themes revolving around the use of the Arabic script in visual communication today. So for today's panel, we have three amazing speakers. I will sort of like, spoiler alert, we all come from the same university. So, and it wasn't on purpose, I just noticed when I was looking at the bios today. So I hope you forgive me for having to read the bios, even though some of these people I've known for more than 20 years, but I'm just gonna read anyways. So the first presentation will be by Tala Safié. And Tala is a graphic designer from Beirut, based in New York. She has a Bachelor of Graphic Design from the American University of Beirut. That's the one where everyone on the panel, myself, studied. And she has an MFA in design from the School of Visual Arts here in New York. And to quote Steve, she was one of the best students, which I think this is like the best recommendation you can ever get from anyone. So I'm super excited to see what she has to say today. Tala is very active in the New York design community and is speaking often and often invited as a juror at design courses and competitions. She currently works as a designer for AIGA Ion Design and is the art director for the New York Times. So please help me welcome Tala. Thank you so much. These things always take a second. Just bear with us.
Thank you, Dr. Nadine Chahine and the Center for Book Arts for having me here today. When Nadine first told me, I was reluctant to accept the invitation because I was very intimidated to be among all the amazing Arab type designers in the symposium. Especially that for the past few years, the bulk of my design work has been in English ever since I moved here. So I currently work as a designer for AIGA's Ion Design and as an art director for the New York Times, where I'm allowed to literally use 4 typefaces. But I try to take on freelance design work whenever I can in Arabic because it's very important to me to keep bilingual design as a significant trait in my practice. And it's also a good way to keep working with friends in Beirut. In this talk, I'm going to be mainly sharing my experience working with this guy, Aboudi Abou Jaoudi, who's a brilliant Lebanese collector and archivist. And his 500-page book, Haza al Massa, which translates to Tonight in English, that I designed during my work with Studio Safar back in 2015. For those who don't know, Studio Safar is a graphic design studio based in Beirut. This book narrates the history of cinema in Lebanon through its printed promotions, so anything from one-column press ads to full-blown-up large-scale posters. When I was a student at the American University of Beirut writing my thesis on the role of graphic design in Lebanese film culture, I spent a year going to Aboudi's extensive archive after class, helping him scan and organize his prints. And my thesis advisor at the time, Dr. Zena Maasri, who's a scholar and currently a senior lecturer at the University of Brighton, introduced me to him. Getting to know Aboudi and getting to be around and work closely with the material in his archive over the span of a year immensely helped me with the book design project that came about 3 years after that. In this talk, I'm going to walk you through the rich visual material of the book and highlight some key historical and technical aspects of the graphic design practice behind the print culture of the film industry of that era. I'm also going to be explaining how some of these characteristics informed some of the design decisions that we took when we made this book. So the book contains press ads, which were found in printed publications, and they vary from like half a page to full page illustrated ads. It also contains magazine articles, like this very negative one that translates to "Burn this film and don't let anybody see it," from 1946. It's a review of Kawkab Amirat Sahra. It also contains lobby cards, which are some sort of hybrids of movie posters, but they come in a landscape format. And these lobby cards used to be displayed in lobbies of cinema to attract people to come in and watch the movie by showing glimpses of scenes on those cardboards. So basically this is a cardboard, and then these images are generally manually stuck on these cardboards. And they have like key scenes from the films so that you would go and see it. And the rest of the cardboard usually contains credits and the title of the film. The book also contains documentations of the press books, or what they used to call campaign manuals. And these are now obsolete promotional tools created by film distributors to market their films. And these press books contain information about the cast, credits. They even contain lyrics from the songs included in the films, and photos from the different scenes, from, again, key scenes from the films. These were often bilingual, as you can see here. Sometimes it's in Arabic and usually either French or English. And these are examples of bilingual covers that open, so it's the same book that opens from both sides to accommodate the reading direction. And when I used to scan a lot of these when I was working with Aboudi, and one thing that struck me is that the inside sometimes is completely surprising, like in this case, where these are pictures that I think I took at the time, and you can see how, like the inside monochromatic design is completely clashes with the outside, and then you have this smaller booklet on the inside that has the lyrics of the songs that is printed on a completely different type of papers. So these types of things, I wanted the reader of the book eventually to be able to understand that these press books were that intricately designed and full of surprises. Some of them that don't have two covers, for example, were designed in such a way with like a 3-panel gatefold with French on one side and Arabic on one side that you can open and then read from both ways. The book also contains posters, obviously, and Aboudi used to compile these posters from cinemas, distribution companies, and fans all over the Arab world, Cairo, Damascus, Tunisia, and Rabat, and in Lebanon. And Aboudi also had an abundant amount of film stills from each film. And we decided to include some of these stills in the book, but more as a visual footnote, just to give some context to the prints, because we really wanted the prints to be in the foreground and the images sort of to complement them and give it a bit of, references. So this book is important for two reasons. The first one is that it's the only resource that carefully documents an accurate timeline of films produced in Lebanon from the 1920s till the end of the 1970s. It provides a comprehensive movie library, including names of producers, directors, technicians, and actors, and poster designers. The Lebanese Civil War that started in 1975 was one of the many reasons the records of the Lebanese film industry have been inaccurate and sometimes lost. So this book managed to sort of set the record straight when it comes to the movie industry in Lebanon in that era. And this book is also important because it offers an opportunity to inscribe these promotional prints that are often snubbed as commercial pitch into a global history of graphic design. And Dr. Zina Masri, whom I mentioned before, and who played a major role in bringing this project to life, wrote an important essay that presents a solid case against looking at these prints from a purely nostalgic perspective, providing historical depth to thicken their contemporary vintage skin. According to her, the rise of the cinema industry... The rise of the cinema industry in the Arab world, with Egypt at the forefront, has contributed to the development of a specialized graphic design practice attached to the promotion of the film product. Her essay is included in the book in English, Arabic, and French, and I'll be quoting from it throughout the presentation. So we chose to design this book chronologically as it was important to provide a clear timeline of the films produced in Lebanon in that era. So the space allocated to each film depended on how much material we had on each film. So it varied from one page to one spread like this one to sometimes 16-page one-off highlights that are sort of spread out within the book. We created a system where the design is minimal so that it doesn't compete with the visuals that we're presenting. So we simply provided technical information that is consistently placed at the top of each page in a box that also serves as a caption and credit field for the visuals. And all the film titles have been drawn by calligrapher Ali Asi specifically for this book. For this film, The Temple of Love, or Ma'bad al-Hub, we wanted to shed light on the poster as the centerpiece, while the stills sort of bleed out of the frame. And the stills are also printed with a silver Pantone so they're more of a texture rather than a main visual element on the page. These pictures, or visual footnotes, as I'm calling them, give the reader a sense of what the film looked like and what the story is about. So here, for example, you can tell which scene from the film has been picked for the poster of the film. In the spread that's dedicated to Beirut 011, we chose to highlight the poster and also an article about the film. And the article is fully legible for the reader, which gives him a bit of context of when the film was created. This spread, dedicated to Lebanon by night, compares the poster to the lobby card. And you can see that the color scheme is consistent between both. However, the type treatment is entirely different. So it's kind of interesting to make those connections between the lobby cards and the posters and the press books, which were generally designed by different people. Sometimes they pick up aspects from each other, and sometimes they just go way off. And we're going to look at different examples now. This is the spread dedicated to Junun Murahikat or Teenagers' Folly, compares the film poster to the two covers of the press book, and you can see that the logo mark in this case is consistent. However, the color scheme and the graphic treatment is different in both marketing tools. But you could notice how the hand-drawn poster is exactly inspired by a photograph that is siloed on the cover of the press book. And indeed, press books were generally photography-based, where the posters were often hand-drawn. As I mentioned earlier, press books were intricate, and I was sort of fascinated by them as a student, and I wanted the reader to grasp their materiality. And so we decided to shoot them, and with me handling the press book, opening it, closing it. And this also gives the reader a sense of scale, because they had very different sizes. Some of them were as big as a lobby card, some of them were just little notebooks. So that was something we wanted to share with the reader as well. So this one, for example, has the gatefold, and then ta-da! This one is even more complex, with half a gatefold and a booklet in the bottom. So this is something that we really wanted to show in the book, because it's hard to explain to a reader how it's bound. Now, among all these different print adverts, the poster was the most important and impactful, and it was referred to as al-affiche in spoken Egyptian Arabic, which means poster in French. And according to Dr. Maasri, the French reference links the Arab film poster to the Parisian model of the publicity poster at the turn of the 20th century, in which designers claimed creative authorship over their maquettes. And indeed, Arab artists signed their posters in their own names, claiming authorship over the artwork. Like here, for example, for Studio Marcel, who was a well-known Egyptian name in the industry, or Raghib, for this one, who is another prominent name in the industry. And the reason why these two designers are from Egypt is because Lebanese posters were largely produced, designed, and printed in Cairo. Some films, this is the same film, two separate poster for it. So some films had up to 3 different editions of posters to satisfy and serve different markets. Each version would be produced in a different country. This one was made in Egypt, that one was made in Beirut, and some of them were even produced in Rome or in Europe, sometimes depending on the film. And we wanted to show those different variations in the book by including as many versions as we can, and specifying the origin and the designer of each. Layali Sharq, or Orient Nights, is a film that had 3 different posters, for example, and you can see a similar logo mark in 2 of them, which were both made by the same artist, Ahmed Fuad. Well, the middle one looks completely different, and you can see his signature top as well. So the poster aesthetics also depended on reproduction techniques on local printing sites. So offset printing and new mechanical color separation technologies in Beirut in the 1960s replaced the manual color separation techniques that gave Egyptian posters their vibrant color density and were widespread in Cairo. So, the colors are a bit off here, but the vibrance of the Egyptian posters was due to the fact that they were lagging a little bit in terms of in terms of mechanical color separation tools. And so a lot of the color separations were done manually, which provided that nice, vibrant tone on their posters. And photographic montages of star figures also started happening in Lebanon, and they sort of replaced the hand-drawn style that remained, due to technical constraints, a major trait of Egyptian posters until the 80s. And so here, for example, you can see two different posters for the same film, one created in Beirut and one created in Cairo, and you can sort of see how these techniques were impacting the artworks. This is another example that's one of my favorites, where the exact same photo is illustrated in the Egyptian version, and it's presented as a siloed photograph in the Beirut version. Designers creatively hand-lettered the film titles in harmony with the overall design and feel of the film, of the poster that they created, inspired by the film. Here you can see a pretty literal example where notes are integrated in the poster title of the film Melody of My Heart. And here too, you can see a quite literal interpretation in Farewell Poverty or Wadan Ya Fukur, where the goodbye is written with little coins versus the fukur that shows signs of precarity. And here's a third example with for Mughamarat Fulfula, The Adventures of Fulfula, with hairy typography. Despite the artistic authorities that the designers had at the time, they still had to cater to a capitalist cinema industry. So there were a lot of people involved in the process: film producers, distributors, directors, without mentioning the actors, who had a lot of opinions about how they were portrayed on the posters. According to Dr. Masri, these new aesthetics transformed Arab cities symbolically, effectively, and materially. And indeed, these large-scale posters filled streets and used to cover entire buildings, leaving a prominent mark in the urban environment. And there's this one photo that I took back in 2010 when I was still a student that I just really connected to, and it sort of reminded, like when I was really digging deep into those posters, it sort of reminded me of that endearing and pretty remarkable aesthetic. This is, I think, a sewing shop in Hamra. And speaking of urban environments, we were inspired by Lebanese film theater neon signage for the cover. And we were careful not to use a photo from the archive of Aboudi for the cover, since the inside was already pretty rich with visual material. And we wanted to contrast by making a pretty typographic, simple treatment on the cover. And in one hand, I thought of it like we're creating our own theater that hosts all of these films in there. And I will end by saying that I'm grateful to have participated in the making of a book that became an important record, not only of the Lebanese cinema industry, but also of the cosmopolitan and transnational graphic design practices of that era. And I want to think that the prints that are featured in this book somehow extended the life of the films that they were promoting.
So while we're fixing that, yeah, thank you so much. That was really amazing. Thank you. One of the reasons why I wanted Tala to speak to us today, because the book in itself is an example of contemporary Arabic graphic design, but it also deals with a topic which is more about the heritage of Arabic graphic design. So it's a really nice combination between the two. And I love how you you're inspired by the visuals into the design itself. I think it's quite interesting for us to sort of bridge the history of Arab poster design and graphic design in general with the current contemporary practice, which in some cases we don't often see. So that's why it was so interesting. And I will have questions for you when we sit on the panel. Okay, so for the next speaker, this was not working before. Anyways, I'm super excited to welcome Bahia. So Bahia Shehab is a professor of design and founder of the graphic design program at the American University of Cairo. Her work has been exhibited in museums, galleries, and streets around the world. She has received a number of international recognitions and awards, which include the BBC 100 Women list in 2013, a TED Senior Fellowship in 2016, and a Prince Claus Award in 2016 as well. She is the first Arab woman to receive the UNESCO Sharjah Prize for Arab Culture. Her publications include 1,000 Times No, The Visual History of Lam Alif, Khat 2010. If you haven't seen it, you really should see it. At the corner of a dream, from Kinko Library in 2019, and a co-authored book, A History of Arab Graphic Design, AUC Press 2020. So one other detail as well. So Bahia also studied at the American University of Beirut, and she and I share the same mentor. So in one way or another, we're practically sisters. So yeah, so please help me welcome Bahia, and I'm really looking forward to the talk.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Nadine because actually I'm going to be wrapping up 10 years of research, because suddenly all my books made sense together and why I'm researching the Arabic script and its history. So in 2010 I started collecting 1,000 Times No for a project that I was invited to. And 10 years later, it's in the press now, a book on the history of Arab graphic design. So for me, I wanted to look, because when we graduated, we came out to the market and I didn't understand why Arabic looked so ugly on the street. And historically speaking, when I looked at the history of Arabic, it was really beautiful and it had a very rich calligraphic history. So I wanted to understand the history of it, and this was the reason for my MA and the 1,000 Times No project, is looking at the history of the Lam Alif. And then I wanted to understand where is my immediate history. So if these known patrons and unknown calligraphers of history, what about now? Who are the immediate graphic designers? So the book on the history of graphic design, and then for my PhD, I looked at the Arabic script in paintings, and I was interested in how Arab artists started using the Arabic letter in their paintings as a manifestation of their identity. And I tried to create a module for people to understand and navigate these different paintings and their creators. So I will start by talking to you about Arabic calligraphy and the problems of Arabic calligraphy. It's always associated with history, and it's always linked to patrons and religious authority. So in the mind of vernacular culture or people on the street, when they see calligraphy, they think Quran or they think religious text. So it has this really sacred place in the minds of people, which you will see historically will cause a big problem for its sister, typography. It evolved over long centuries. I will show you some beautiful examples now. It manifested in different mediums across dynasties in different geographies. Its evolution was halted for different social economic reasons with the rise and fall of dynasties. And the key figures who patroned and used calligraphers and calligraphy were sultans, kings, viziers, ministers, calligraphers and different parts of the intelligent society. So when we look at the history of Arabic calligraphy, we always see this, they call it Kufi al-Masahif al-Ula, or the early books, Kufic. This is one example, one of the earliest dated examples. The problem with these manuscripts is that they were rarely dated, so this reference we can use to date other books according to it. And suddenly when you see Kufic, you start thinking of the evolution of Kufic, and you think of a linear evolution of the language. But what I want to share with you today is a different look at this story. I started looking at the dynasties and the patrons. So for example, these were commissioned by the same patron, and if we look at the shape of the script on the coin, on a street sign, and on a very important building, you find that the shape of the Kufic is completely different. So some is very thin, and on the coin it's minted, and in the mosaic it's a completely different kind of script. So the script is changing according to the medium it's being used in. Moving on to the Fatimid period, a few hundred years later, and you discover that the Kufic, and this is my favorite actually period, because the Kufic was so experimental and they were really playing around with what they can do with it. So this is a small mihrab, which is a prayer piece. So you move it around and you pray. In front of it, it's decorated with the Kufic script all around. In the middle are some inscriptions from Al Hakim Mosque, which is a mosque in Cairo, and with this beautiful floriated Kufic. And then there's a small cup with random writing, and then the same royal Kufic on a tiraz, which is a royal robe. But then you come to look at the coin, and it's cursive, it's not Kufic. So I'm really interested in the systems that the dynasties employed, and how, again, we think that Fatimids are Kufic, but there's a lot of historic evidence on coins, on textile, that show cursive being also utilized during the Fatimid period. So it was never a linear evolution from Kufic to Naskh, except in the Quran, which is the main book. So the patrons chose which script to use, and this was actually a technology. So they changed from Kufic to cursive because it was faster to write, easier to disseminate. So it was a technological reason. So I look at these examples, and I can't help but look at the designs of them. And I want to share with you one example of a calligraphic system on an artifact. This is the Cenotaph of Al Hussein, and this is housed at the Museum of Islamic Art in Cairo. And if you can see, it has three sides, and it has two kinds of script. It has cursive script and Kufic script. So, and it's very decorated, it's very ornamental. This is a very important piece, but I was really interested in understanding how information is navigated on this cenotaph. So the side A is on the other side, and you can see the red dot is the beginning of the text, the blue is the cursive, the gray is the Kufic, and then X means the end the verse has ended. And your eye moves along the three sides, and then when you put them all together, you see how the designer and the calligrapher actually worked on the transformation of information from one side to the other, and how the script goes around. So this is really very sophisticated design exercise. And this also applies elsewhere. This is the Ichanid Dynasty, and these are some examples of, again, the appearance of different kinds of scripts next to each other. This is Shrine of Abdul Samad, and you can see the cursive calligraphy on the inside of the dome, and on the outside there's different examples of square Kufic and different kinds of Kufic. With the Mamluks, again, we have this beautiful patronage of arts and buildings. Again, you can see, remember the Stughra, because this is the signature of the Sultan, and you'll see how the signature of kings and sultans will evolve with us now. But these are all visual systems that you can see the unity in them. And to me, Islamic art was really a manifestation of design systems that were unfolding. If you look at the Safavid Sheikh Lutfullah building, really beautiful space, so homogeneous design to simulate a heavenly space. But if you look at miniatures that were produced at the same time, you find this parallel, this unified visual language that you can directly identify a Safavid work of art. Same for the Ottoman Empire with their beautiful tulips and their huge calligraphic examples. And here I'm showing two mosques. One is Sulaymaniye and the other is Uluchani. One is in Bursa, one is in Istanbul. And I want to show you the inside and how this one featured the work of the most prominent experimental calligraphers of the time. So they were blowing up, mirroring, and playing around with the calligraphy, while the other one is more, again, you can see it better here. One is royal, gold, polished, using a very classical kind of script, and the other one is just playing around with the calligraphy and experimenting with it. Same dynasty, different cities, a few hundred years in difference. This is the Tughra, the signature of the Ottoman Sultan. You can see what a complex system it is, what a complex hierarchy also. So Suleiman Shah, you can see how it's highlighted, and every stroke and every movement has a reason. So they're mainly cursive, thuluth, and naskh in there. So I'll briefly summarize the 1,000 times no findings for you, because I will show you how, I will simplify how the rise and fall of empires affects the rise and fall of the shape of the script. So these were collected on everything I found produced under Islamic or Arab patronage in the past 1,400 years, from Spain to the borders of China. So these are the first examples from the 7th and 8th centuries on coins, very rough, very crude designs. And the reason why I trace them and I don't put pictures is because I want you to appreciate the design in its pure form. So this is a 9th century Cairo, and this is all on one tombstone. These are the designs of lam alifs. These all mean no, on one small tombstone at the Islamic Museum in Cairo. This is the Nilometer. You can see how formal, royal it is. It's a Abbasid building in Cairo. And then these are script experiments on different mediums, on textile, on pottery, and in manuscripts. 10th century, what we saw a few centuries before on a small tombstone, we're seeing now on a royal building. This is Al Hakim Mosque in Shari' al-Mu'izz in Cairo. The lam alifs are very experimental again. This is Peri Alamdar, 11th century, is the beginning of beautiful experimentation with the script. You can see how varied, experimental, and playful it is in different mediums, in different places around the world. These are, again, this is 12th century. This is in Cairo on a dome, on a Abbasid dome, and 100 years later, the same logic appears in Konya and the school of Kataray. This was painted and this was on stucco, so the medium is always changing. With the Mamluks, we have, again, concepts that are emerging, the bold and the light, and you saw the different mediums where these were applied. And then the 13th century is when the square kufik became prominent, came to the forefront. 14th century, we're still experimenting, we're still creating new forms. 15th century, less. 16th century, less. 17th century, we go back to basic forms. 18th century, I'm not finding anymore this vibrancy. And then 19th century, a few examples of the basic cursive and square kufik. And then the computer. And the computer is trying to imitate history, and it's stiff and dry, and it's trying to imitate newspaper headlines, and it's trying to experiment, but it's stiff and dry. And this is what most of the fonts look like right now, unfortunately. So you see, visually speaking, very quickly, the rise and fall of dynasties, but the rise and fall of a script, which is the manifestation of these dynasties. It's a reflection. It's the last thing you see. It's the philosophies, the sciences, the research, the openness, the creativity that you see with the script. The script says all that about a civilization. There's no script without calligraphers, and I want to share with you a few stories of the calligraphers that I've been looking at in the upcoming book. And this is the link for me because they are the last people safeguarding that long tradition, and they're the ones who carried the torch to tell us the story. Yusuf Ahmed was a teacher at the School of Improving, the Royal School of Improving the Arabic Script in Cairo. He was born in 1875. He was also one of the pioneers in reviving the Kufic script, and these are some examples that he's designing for the king. He also designed the cover of the book. This is a very important book by Ibrahim Gumha on the evolution of Kufic writings on buildings. He also designed this masthead for the newspaper Palestine or Palestine. Another calligrapher is Mustafa Bek Razlan, and he was born in 1860. Mustafa Bek also created these logos for the king, and then his work was continued by Muhammad Murtada, who created the rest of the royal emblems. I want to show you these. I love this picture because it features some of the most prominent calligraphers of the time who were teaching at the school and who were working at the royal school and doing commissions for the king, but also to the institutions and the companies that were in the market. So the first one is Muhammad Husni, who created this, we call it Khat al-Taj, Kitabat al-Taj, or the writing of the crown. It's a script that is for the king. And then this logo for the Muslim youth. These are also some of this is the thing that you find on streets, and that's mass printed and distributed on the streets. So these are some examples of his work. The other calligrapher is Said Ibrahim, and Said Ibrahim pictured here, these were all professors at the School of the Script. These were all calligraphers and teachers at the School of the Script in Cairo. He created the logos for some of the most famous singers and authors of his time, and these were like their stamps. Kulthum is one of the most famous Arab divas. Chicorel is a manufacturer owned by a Jewish family that had to leave after the revolution, but he created the logo for them. And you can see he created also the opening credits of several films. This is just one example. So the cinema was starting. Calligraphers were being commissioned by the movie industry. They were being commissioned by big companies, and they were being asked to teach at the school and create work for the king. Said Ibrahim is phenomenal because he also designed all the street signs for Cairo and several mastheads for newspapers and many book covers. This is just, he scribed this one, he didn't draw the drawing, he created the calligraphy for it. So calligraphers were collaborating with illustrators and art directors at the time. The equivalent of Said Ibrahim in Algeria is Omar Rasim, and Omar also created the street signs for Algeria. This is the cover of the Bible. He also was creating ads and posters for different brands. these are some examples. In Lebanon, we had Kamel al-Baba, and I really want to tell this tragic story because we found nothing when we went to visit his children. His son is also a calligrapher, but nothing of his archive has survived. And this is something that we saw repeatedly in our research, especially in Syria right now. Many of the designers and the artists living there are losing their archives every day. It's because of, and I think it's the same as for Kamel al-Baba during the Lebanese Civil War, a lot of his work. And besides, the calligraphers didn't consider this work. They considered it like a side job because they were not scribing a Quran or creating a painting. So it wasn't as important for them to keep a record of. So they didn't create any archive of their work, which is very, very sad and unfortunate. But we know that he scribed in Nahar, and this is a logo of a very well-known newspaper in Lebanon. Finally, for Cairo, Khudair al-Bursaidi is a national treasure. I take my students to meet him every semester. He's just an amazing, phenomenal talent. He has painted over 8,000 paintings, and he is Naqib al-Khattatin. Translation, please.
Head of the syndicate
Of calligraphers, and he gives the licenses for anybody who wants to be declared a calligrapher. So he designed all the 80s TV soap opera, very well known all over the Arab world. And he's currently collaborating. He's very active on Facebook if you want to follow him. And he's he said this reads the Egyptian television soon, so we're looking forward to see what is he going to be doing with the Egyptian television. But those are examples of his previous experiments with Egyptian TV. So this is a quick preview of calligraphy, where it was, how it is now, and who are the people who represent it, or the faces associated with it. And unfortunately, I didn't find any women. I'm still looking for them, but this is what we have so far. And I want to talk in the middle, before we jump to typography, I want to talk about Arab lettering, because throughout our research we have come across some nothing short of really brilliant, amazing work. So lettering is experimental, it's individual, it's expressive, it's linked to modern and contemporary practices, it combines aesthetics and legibility, and it can be reproduced. And the key operators in that would be calligraphers, type designers, and designers. I will share with you the works of some of the master designers. I feel really bad because I can't put everybody in this presentation. We interviewed around 80 designers. So I'm really selecting those with the strongest visual language and the longest history. Burhan Karkutli was a Syrian designer. He was born in Damascus and he died in Germany in 2003. I think this is the only example of psychedelic Arabic that I found. It took me around a month to decipher what's written in this, but I was able to crack it. So it is a wedding invitation, and it reads, so the crescent reads, it was drawn by Burhan Karkutli in Frankfurt, 1971, and then down there it reads, treat them fairly, it's a saying from the Quran, and then on the top the headline is Al-Hub wa Tasamuh, or love and forgiveness, and in the middle he's wishing them, I wish you happy marriage and happiness decorated with flowers and children as beautiful as hope and prosperity and goodness. And this is dedicated to Miss Eva Janssen and her husband Ted Leva Janssen. God bless them and protect them. So this is what it reads. But what's fascinating about Burhan is that he combines Arab folkloric vernacular visual culture with really very developed calligraphic aesthetics or lettering aesthetics. In these beautiful examples of his work, He plays with letters, but he also plays with forms, and he mixes mythology with stories, with poetry, and you don't need to read Arabic to understand what he's talking about. And what's really interesting during this period in the 70s, and what was happening in Europe, and you look at psychedelic posters, and you look at what was happening in the States and in Europe, and I see the effect of these ideas, but also it's very well rooted in his visual culture. It builds on these big moon eye beauties from Qajar works of art, so these women with very big, beautiful eyes, and this miniature, this obsession with the detail in his painting. And the female body, so he writes for the pubic hair, he has little writings that read flower and moon and love. So it's super, super cute. Helmi Touni is another designer. We created a retrospective for his 80th birthday in Cairo, and he filled 3 floors of the gallery with just his design work. He's a brilliant talent, very productive, and beautiful work. I'll just show you a few examples. These were created for the Arab theater in Beirut in the late 1970s. These were for 2 plays. And these are examples of his book, children's book cover design. And this series won a lot of awards. But it's also, again, you can see how he plays with the letters and he makes them feel at home. And I think this is the exercise we will be talking about in typography, is that with calligraphy, calligraphers manage to make the script comfortable where it's sat. If it was on fabric or on glass or on wood, the medium was the script worked well with the medium. It wasn't fighting with it. And I think this is what these designers managed to create in their visual languages. Muhammad Heggi is, I will show him because he's one of the few, he's banned all over the Arab world. His work is banned. This book, you can't find it anywhere. It's out of print. I found a copy in Rabat during my research in Morocco. But he has a Facebook page and you can also follow him. He doesn't post, but the whole book is online, which is amazing. The name of the book is Shimal Yamin, which means left right. And by left right, he's talking about the military that go just left right without thinking. For me, he did a lot of lettering work, but I just want to share with you his visual language and how critical he was of military dictatorships all over the Arab world. So what he did is he got these poems and he illustrated the visuals for them, reflecting the poem, but reflecting also the state of people in the Arab world and the state of how people suffer from. So this is and he's breaking all taboos, because this is a very important Islamic religious character, Al-Buraq, and it's being ridden and beaten by a general, and here a general is courting Mary. So he really breaks all taboos, and the poetry that he uses. So this is some of his lettering work, but I wanted to share that other book because I hope he reprints it. I think there's a lot of need for it, and I think you can understand why it's banned in our part of the world. Before we move on to typography, I just want to share with you the visual language of those who inspire us. And there's a great exhibition at the Gray Gallery, if you can go see it. That is featuring some of the work of these artists. There are many, I'm only sharing 3 today, just to show you those who are really driving our visual language forward conceptually and visually. Because they're not restricted by a brief. They don't have to answer to a client. They are their own client. and they are the artists. Rachid Qureshi is an Algerian-French artist, and he is a Sufi, but in his style he mixes Amazigh culture, so the culture of North Africa, with Sufi beliefs, and also Islamic manuscript design. He's very experimental in mediums. He works on fabric, in metal, and he creates installations. So this is one example of his installations where he's using pottery. This is one sculpture that he created in 2005, and this is a light projection. So Rachid is his playfulness and the way he combines parts of the visual language is what I think is fascinating, and he has work on show here. Hassan Masroudi, to me, cracked something very important, is that Arabic calligraphers work with their hand on a table, and calligraphers from the East work with their whole body, so their whole body moves to create a letter. And Hassan Masroudi combined these two traditions. So he took Arabic and he played with it the way you would play with Chinese or Japanese calligraphy, and he creates these beautiful compositions. But he's also an intellectual who researches and writes books about Arabic calligraphy, so I would highly recommend you check out his books. Njay Mahdawi decided that he doesn't care about legibility. Unlike Masroudi, who here subtext the calligraphy with a subheadline, just decided he doesn't want to deal with the Arabic script as a legible form, and he creates these fascinating works of art that are simply mesmerizing, really. And again, he also plays in different mediums, on different fabric, metal, everything. And this is an installation that he created for a mosque in Saudi Arabia, and you can see how he's playing with the light and the shadow. He also designed the 50-year anniversary airplanes, 4 planes for Gulf Air, and I think he's one other designer, one other calligrapher has done that. So he's not shy from taking on big projects. He also recently designed an installation for the Google headquarters. So finally, our mentor and teacher, Samir Saïq. Samir Saïq is an architect of letters. He deconstructs and constructs letters. He's also a poet. So I will share a few random examples of his structures and how, from different periods for the past 20 years or 25 years, he's been painting and experimenting with the structure of Arabic and breaking it and dismantling it and playing with it. But these are two of logos that he's created, two of my favorite. He's also featured as a designer in our book on the calligrapher. So finally we come to Arabic typography. So you can see how difficult it is, because now you have all that baggage and you have to design a font. And actually, I'm honored to be here today because actually I teach Nadine and Tarek in the classroom. I Skype them in, and if I can't Skype them in, my students do research and write about them, because I think what they're doing is amazing. And sorry if your data is not updated, but so Arabic typography is associated with technology, needs to be, in our part of the world at least, it still needs to be institutionalized, suffers from 3 abortions historically, and I'll tell you about these 3 abortions because I think there are moments in history when you see events shifting the course of things, and I think Arabic calligraphy has had 3 of those. Okay. It is yet to be manifested on different mediums, and the evolution has been gaining traction since the 80s, and the key operators are type designers, type foundries, and key patrons. So you can see the difference that now something that was adopted by kings, sultans, viziers, and every big title on the planet is now being championed by designers and type designers only on their own without the support of any government. So I'll share with you quickly master inventors and type designers. So Nasri Khattar really wanted Arabic to be accessible and legible, and his experiment was the second abortion for Arabic. The first one happened in Istanbul when the printing press was invented. And there were 60,000 calligraphers in Istanbul, and they stood against the printing press. So we never had, most of the early Arabic fonts were designed by Europeans actually, not calligraphers and not Arab-speaking people. So in the first 200 years of the printing press, the Arabic language didn't benefit from the intelligence or the creativity of calligraphers and designers because the rulers at the time stopped the technology from, so that was the first, I think, abortion of Arabic typography. The second one was with Nasri Khattar with his divided letters, or the unified Arabic, where he divided the letters to be written individually. He got grants, he published books for children, he created TV commercials to promote. But again, calligraphers in Cairo and in different parts of the world accused him of Latinizing Arabic and breaking it up and identifying with the West, especially that he was living in the States and he came back to the Arab world from the States with this solution. If we had used this as a legibility exercise and not have it understood as something that is trying to change the whole language, I think we would have also been elsewhere in terms of legibility for Arabic if we had governments. And this is really the third abortion and the saddest, because Mohammed Said al-Saggar is a Iraqi designer who was really passionate about the Arabic script, and he was really bothered by the big, large cases of Arabic lead, and he wanted to create a solution for that. So he is the only designer I know of who summarized Arabic into only 17 forms, even though there are 29 letters in the alphabet. He created these forms, and when you combine them, you get the extra letters. And unfortunately for him, technology changed quickly. We didn't need any more lead cases. But even when he designed these fonts, and after lots of fights and getting them adopted by a local newspaper in Iraq, he was accused of espionage. He had an informer live with him in the house for a whole year. He would come in every morning. They really bullied him. The calligraphers wrote letters against him to the government. He was under house arrest for a year, and then he fled and lived in Paris, where he died. But he wrote a book and documented his story, and we tell part of his story in his book, in our book. But he was really obsessed with how to develop Arabic and how to bring it to the 20th century at the time. Before we move on to more recent, we cannot ignore the Letraset experiment, who brought in a lot of designers from the Arab world who were living in London at the time, Sudanese, Lebanese, and Egyptian designers, and eventually they moved to the Arab world and started commissioning calligraphers and designers from within the Arab world. And that created a movement in the shape of the script, or the creativity of the shape of the script. To move forward with some type designers / lettering / calligraphers, these talents combine everything. Munir Sharani is a Syrian designer. These are a few of his examples. I'm featuring him because he was extremely productive in the late, in 1981, he was in Beirut before the Israeli invasion, and he was producing all the designers we interviewed would tell us. We created thousands of book covers, and we thought they were exaggerating, but Beirut was the capital of Arab publishing before the Civil War, and designers were very busy at the time. Ma'moun Sa'al, who will hopefully be here, I'm so proud of you. is also another prominent figure. He was born in Syria, originally studied as an architect, but now he's also a type designer and a very active member of the type design community. Taj Sir Hassan, a beautiful human being, also went through the letterset experience when he was a student in London at Central St. Martin's. He is the founder and editor of Huruf Arabiya, which is a magazine concerned with Arabic calligraphy and calligraphers. These are some examples of his lettering work early on in the 70s when he was still a student, and in early parts of his career in the 80s. Who is driving now? I'll share with you some names quickly. Huda Abi Faris from the Khat Foundation. She is very, it's wonderful what she's doing, because one woman and she's publishing all these books on Arab design. It has to be saluted and appreciated. And she has now a full library on design from the Arab world. Nadine, who is sitting here with us today, what she did is phenomenal. Lara Aswad is an independent designer, but also award-winning, and I'm so happy with all these women. And then comes Tarua. Yara, who's currently at AUB, Christian Sarkis, Pascal Zourbi. So what do we need right now for us to move on? I think we need public awareness, institutional support, curriculum inclusion, connecting talent, and publishing more books about Arab design. My latest project is Mukhtabar al-Huruf, or Type Lab. We created a lab at AUC that is concerned with bringing all these people together. We started just a few months ago, and one of our projects is, so this is our page, we post our findings in terms of the script. One of our projects is the Arabic encyclopedia, the visual encyclopedia of the Arabic script, where we are documenting over 70,000 Arabic letters. So this database, some designers have already donated their letters to this database. We are hoping that this will be an open source free reference for all designers who are concerned with the Arabic script and its evolution. It will be available hopefully later this year. It documents the letters in reference to their, again, where they were created. I wanted to put myself in context quickly, just so you know what I do in all this other than research, because these are my heroes, and as an artist, I want to show you real quickly how all this reflected on my practice. So during the revolution, I was active as an artist, and I started taking notes and spraying them on the street. The first one was no to military rule, and then many other notes I started spraying on the street: no to killing, no to bullets, no to sectarian division, no to burning books, no to stripping the people. And I started spraying these notes repeatedly on the street. This is what the streets look like in Cairo right now. So I started painting the nose in different cities around the world with new messages added to them, more general messages about our humanity. And then I went to different cities, sprayed nose so many times that this was erased in one night. The faster they erase, the better the message is. This was recently in Beirut. And eventually I had enough of saying no, so I decided to paint poetry. So I started experimenting with what Arabic can do, and I collected my paintings in a book. But these are all poems by the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish. At the Corner of a Dream was the first intervention in Vancouver, and it was a poem that read "Stand at the corner of a dream and fight," and this is where the title of the book comes from. The second was here in New York for the imprisoned women, political prisoners. It was for the imprisoned butterflies. And in Madison, I painted "No to the Impossible." And then in Marrakesh, I painted "We Love Life If We Had Access to It." And I'm always playing with legibility, but also how Arabic can be expressive. In Tokyo, I painted On This Earth There Are Things Worth Living For, and in Kefalonia, for the people drowning at sea, I painted Those Who Have No Land Have No Sea. In Beirut, I painted My Country Is Not a Suitcase. And in Amsterdam, I painted One Day We Will Be Who We Want to Be. The journey has not started and the road has not ended. In Stavanger, I wanted to remind us of the revolution, so I painted How Big Is the Idea, and then in very small next to it, How Small Is the State. In Paris, I painted one word, I Will Dream. In Hawaii, I painted, and I was fascinated that they were able to revive their language in spite of the colonization, and I painted My People Will Return as Air and Light and Water. In Lincoln, I painted We Will Not Repent Our Dreams, no matter how often they break. And finally, in Antwerp, I painted All the Hearts of the People Are My Identity, Release Me of My Passport. And this was an amazing exercise in community engagement because we had a soup kitchen, we had people just walk in and paint at different parts of the community. So for me, what started as a small stencil rejecting tyranny in Cairo has now become a global lab for me to connect with different people in different cities around the world, around the Arabic script, and talk about my identity and my culture and my heritage. Thank you.
So, who thinks that was brilliant? Yeah, it's a bit shocking. Yeah, definitely deserving of a second round. I'm currently going through an imposter syndrome where I feel completely untalented. I don't know if anybody else is feeling that way. But anyways, so that was amazing. Thank you. Both for the work and for the unbelievable tour de force of looking at Arabic. And it's just so inspiring to see the evolution of the script and what it can do and what it can be. For the next and final speaker today, first I will read his bio and then I'll just continue. So, Lebanese Dutch designer Tarek Atrissi established in 2000 his design studio Tarek Atrissi Design with offices in Barcelona and the Netherlands. The studio's cross-cultural design approach has gained an international reputation and produced projects that left a significant influence on contemporary graphic design landscape in the Middle East. His awards include 2DC New York, the Adobe Design Achievement Awards, and the Design for Asia Award, among others. Tarek holds a BA in Graphic Design with distinction from the American University of Beirut, and a Master's of Arts in Interactive Multimedia from Utrecht School of Arts in Holland, and an MFA in Design Entrepreneurship from the School of Visual Arts in New York. So SBA is also very well represented today. He holds a postgraduate degree in typeface design from Typed Cooper program at the Cooper Union, also here. Tarek founded the ArabicTypography.com, an Arabic type foundry specializing in multilingual typeface design. He has been on the judging panel of many international design competitions, including the Tehran Typeface Design Competition in Iran, the Taiwan International Student Design Competition, the TDC competition in New York, and over 100 poster design competition in Egypt. So he is a board member at Creative Industries Fund in Holland and the Dutch Cultural Fund for Architecture, Design and Digital Culture. And Tarek was my classmate at AUB, and we've known each other since we were 18. And every time we meet, we overeat. So it's a constant theme, typography and a lot of good food. So yeah, thank you, Tarek, and just please come up and help me welcome him. Thank you. Yeah, we also bond over how stressed and exhausted we are. So.
Ooh, it's not. Push the mic down.
Yeah.
All right.
لا لازم شوي أعلى.
Now it works.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Nadine. It's so good to be here. I've graduated from my graduate school was in New York, so it's always very emotional to be back here. It's also like a big reunion, seeing Nadine, seeing some friends, Bahia, classmates, getting to know Tala, who I knew but I didn't know, and looking at all the work, and somehow a lot of the common background, but how we went into completely different focus within one field. Super interesting. So, my name is Tarek Atrissi. I'm originally from Beirut, from Lebanon. Studied at the American University of Beirut and then did my graduate school at SVA here. And I will talk today about branding with Arabic typography. I think Bahia set the ground very well about all the history and the problems we have, and then you come to do your own practice, and on top of that you add the problems of dealing with clients, trying to survive, and working practically with this. And I think when I'm working I set up my studio in the Netherlands back in 2000, so we're 20 years now working. And the focus was always on doing a graphic design studio focusing on Arabic and working in Arabic. My journey with Arabic typography has always been at the intersection of calligraphy, lettering, and typeface design. So exactly what you were talking about, sort of bringing this into our actual work. And I've been working and being all over the world, really started in Beirut, moved to Holland to study, then to New York, then went back to Qatar and Dubai to work. Now the office is in Barcelona in Spain. We set up in Spain and we work from there, and I'm spending most of my time in South America and Bogota specifically, traveling and being inspired and improving my Spanish language. It all started here in Beirut at this wonderful university, the American University of Beirut. It was the first graphic design program in the Middle East at the university, and had a tremendous effect really on the graphic design scene. You can see it today actually with 3 graduates, 4 graduates that are doing so much work. I think what I learned most at the university was not to follow trends and to look exactly what makes us truly unique and build on that. We saw a lot of good work from the West, but there was really, we didn't have that book that Bahia did. We did not really have local inspiration, let's say, and everything in Arabic looked terrible and ugly, and everything coming from the West looked so beautiful. And that was really the challenge. We were very lucky to have Samir Sayed as a teacher. We were not trained as calligraphers, but we were trained to understand calligraphy and to know how to work with calligraphy. And that had a big impact on my practicing career after, because I always incorporated calligraphy and working with calligraphers just like how I work with illustrators and photographers. Inspiration was all over around us. I think one of the things that AUB also taught us how to be inspired by type on the street and how calligraphy manifests itself and typography manifests itself on the streets, the colors, the texture, and all the extra layers that come. And I developed a passion to document street signs across the Arab street and look at the graphics in the environment and urban typography, and often use this as part of my inspiration with work. When you walk in Egypt and you see a beautiful calligraphic sign, but then in a completely new urban context, that to me as a designer is endless inspiration. And I do that in every city, and you start noticing the differences between the type you see on the street and the lettering you see in Morocco or even in Barcelona and Spain. I moved to Holland, and it was exactly the opposite of the Arab world. So when nothing felt design in the Arab world, in Holland everything was design. This was the money that we had, the guilders we had at the time. And it was really a complete cultural shock, because in the Arab world we had so much beautiful heritage, but it wasn't translating to sort of day-to-day graphic design practice. And then you go to Holland, and then the money, which is probably the most corporate, difficult, governmental thing, is designed like this. And nowadays still, like in Holland, everything is over-designed. You look at the central station and the type which comes on the roof, which really no one is seeing, is also perfect. So that was sort of super inspiring, and maybe I think in UB I learned to appreciate the history we have, but in Holland it was really about, to me at least, my first years in Holland and studying there, was about this sort of the Dutch approach of appreciating design and trying to express it in the best possible way. And I learned that good design belongs in a museum. Holland is the country of museums. I can every week go to a museum and always find a new one. And you find in museums the posters, you find in museums the money, you find in museums the stamps that are designed. You find graphic design regularly in museums, even not graphic design museums. I moved to the States after to study at the School of Visual Arts, and I had some of the best teachers and mentors, and Steve was one of them. I studied under Louise Philly and Paula Scher, and they had also a tremendous effect on my work because they both worked in a very different way, very typographically. They used letters and typography as a visual language. And to me, at the time, and this was 2002, 2003, you couldn't do that in Arabic. You couldn't really just take Arabic and make a book cover with it. And that was the drive and the challenge that made me set up my studio, really. I went back to look for inspiration. I was always looking for inspiration in Arabic. We have all the old stuff, and they look so good when they're old, but somehow when they sometimes when you bring them back, they start to look too Islamic, too traditional, not graphically appealing. You look a little bit back and you see all the Egyptian movie posters, and they're so inspiring on all levels, and Tala talked all about it today. But to me also specifically in the lettering and the calligraphy and the colors and the compositions, I started also researching more while practicing. Research was never my main thing in design, but we kind of needed it, and the work of Muhyiddin al-Abbad was probably the most inspiring to me, because Muhyiddin al-Abbad was a practicing designer to me, and he was labeled under being an illustrator, but he was a graphic designer way ahead of his time. His publication Nazar, to me was sort of the blog on graphic design before the internet came, and it had everything. It had insights and a designer sort of thinking on branding, on typography, on the use of type, and even Nazar, the identity of Nazar, the magazine itself, was constantly changing. It was sort of the Google identity approach back then. As an inspiration also, you had the Iranian graphic design scene, which was always at a much higher level than the Arabic graphic design scene, and to us was sort of a parallel universe, because it's using the same script, but it's something completely different and a completely different language and a completely different culture. But it was inspiring in the sense of how they created their own visual language. It was typically to Iran and very distinct from the West. And being a designer who's working commercially, I got interested in the commercial history of graphic design, like collecting logos from the 80s in Lebanon, just trying to see how the bilingual solutions were created. I was more interested in collecting the commercial graphic design work rather than the manuscripts that we always see celebrated as part of Islamic culture and art. And at the beginning of my career, my conclusion was that good design work is never created in advertising agencies. Because that was our only option. We graduated and I could only work in ad agencies. There wasn't even design studios. And ad agencies were doing everything I was taught not to do in design schools. So I decided to get my own studio and get started and go in that adventure. And basically it was a challenge, and the challenge makes a goal, and the goal makes your career. And this is really how it all started. My focus was on creating a studio that's working for the Arab world. I wanted to stay a small graphic design studio. I came to New York, saw a lot of design models, small design studios, medium firms, and I wanted to translate that into something complete that's not an advertising agency doing design work. So Arabic typography was the ingredient of my work. This is what I work with every day, and try to a big extent using that in every design solution we do. And the work was always divided between sort of three working fields: calligraphy, lettering, and type design. And we found ourselves juggling between these three in every project. Calligraphy to me is sort of the historic, traditional, artistic practice of Arabic typography. Type design is much more modular, and of course creating softwares and fonts that are working to use the script in a more digital platforms. And lettering is in between. Lettering is to me is the playing field of the graphic designer, and how you design the word and work with that. And most of our work, particularly in branding, sort of juggled all these three things: calligraphy, lettering, and type design, and almost every branding project, graphic design project. try to follow some of these approaches or mixing them. And our studios mostly focused on branding. We're doing a lot of brands for the Middle East, developing identities, logos, brand identity system. That was one part, and type design came as a second part, as a result actually of doing branding. And I'll explain how we got into type design while working with branding and while working on developing logos. I think when developing identities, one of the main sort of challenge is to balancing the Arabic and Latin. And we tried with the work as much as possible to systemize it, to try to understand what are the different possibilities. How can we like frame what are the different approaches to working with Arabic and Latin? Do we go for the Arabic being the dominant part, or the calligraphy going in contrast totally to the Latin? Or do we go for similarities, or we go to lettering and try to create? So these are all also sort of exercises we used to do on the side to understand what we are working and to try to systemize it better. If I look at Arabic calligraphy, which is the first component of our work, I love this relationship of working with calligraphers, but really briefing calligraphers and getting out of their what they like to do, because calligraphers do the same. Well, they study a lot and they work to master specific styles. But when you're working in branding, you kind of want the rare form, you don't want the known form. So you try to break calligrapher out of their style. And I love this working relationship where we try to work with calligraphers, but then get them out of their comfort zone. And there is this whole approach of taking the work, changing it, building on it graphically, and incorporating it in our work differently. And some of this is work directly done by calligraphers, some of them is calligraphy work that we do ourselves in the office. But I'm showing samples of how Arabic calligraphy was manifesting itself to our project, whether it's a book cover, a poster design, or an exhibition design. And I think that's the beauty of calligraphy, how modular it is, and it can really be anything. And when you're working with design, you can, we're always going for the typographic approach, and it never let us down. We always can find a possibility working with calligraphy. So if I'm asked to design the metro station, to wrap the metro station in Dubai, I go for the calligraphic approach. I go to create through calligraphy a texture and a pattern to wrap it. In 2003, just a bit after, actually immediately after I graduated from SVA, I got the absurd assignment to brand Qatar as a country, as a 24 years old. And I will go quickly through it. It was super interesting because I think, I mean, at the time, it was an interesting project. How do you brand the country? The whole research was how do countries get their identities? And we sort of looked at historical example, but also practical example. Spain is probably the best example in nation branding, because Spain managed to transform itself very quickly from a country that was totally in the negative, how it was perceived, to one of the most touristic countries and approachable countries in the world through the famous logo that Miro has done. The problem with the Miro logo was that everybody wanted to be the Miro logo, and you ended up with all these logos that all looked similar. And I'm going flashback 2003. This was the project back then, the research back then, very quickly to show it. So I really did not want to make another solution that's within this carnival-like feeling. And there it was the first time where I went for a very simple calligraphic approach, super simple, which at the time was breaking with sort of how illustrative everything was in terms of branding. The previous logo before that had the camel and the tree and the desert and all of this in one logo. So purposely we wanted to go for something super simple, super calligraphic, super realistic, which again at the time was interesting, but to me was also, the interesting part is never in the solution, the interesting part is all in the bigger picture, because as I went further to do a lot of more similar project, branding Arabic entities, it was always interesting to see that almost every client I had, they always said we want something very Arabic. But what is Arabic? Nobody seems to agree on. Everybody sort of looks at the Arab culture from a completely different perspective. Some people see it from a futuristic eye, nostalgic eye, Orientalist eye. It's like we're all looking at different things, and nobody's able to define it. And it's very true, because you look, it makes sense. You look at the Arab word, and it's a word in itself, and you're looking over here and over all North Africa. And take one example, we don't speak the same language, we don't have the same culture, we don't speak the same. There is very little in common actually. Here, this chart shows how do you say what are you doing in all the various different ways to speak in Arabic. Actually, the only common thing we have in the Arab world is the written language, the language we read, not even the language we speak. So it makes sense that there is this big confusion about what Arabic culture is, and it makes sense that it reflects itself on branding, of course. The other common thing, I think, in the Arab world is change. Change is happening so fast, and that's the other common thing across every single country. This is Dubai 91, 2005, and this is Dubai right now. And look at any aspect of design, look at architecture. This sort of confusion of what we are is reflects itself, whether it's in design, architecture, of course graphic design as well. Take the most simple form of visual communication, take a toilet sign, and see how it manifests itself differently in different places. You can't use this sort of the traditional way in the Gulf because both men and women are wearing the long attire, so it won't be the same. And you always have sort of Lebanon doing crazy ideas and thoughts. But if I look at this, and I show this example always, if you look at the top signage, this is the signage system in Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, which is done by Bureau Meixenaar, and it's one of the best signage systems in the world. Down is Abu Dhabi Airport, which sort of bought the same system and just added Arabic to it. And I kind of find it sad when we import international solutions and just add the Arabic part of it. We lose something. This is the signage in Morocco, which is much less well thought of, much chaotic. But there's something in it that is much more interesting to me as a designer. And that is more the challenge. How do you take what you have and transform that into a solid signage system rather than importing an international solution and adapting it? And the best way to explain good design is by showcasing bad design always, right? And speaking of signage, this is Beirut Airport. And this is the departure and the arrival. And if I see it, I don't know if I want to leave, and I certainly don't want to come back. But I mean, I show this, and this is also another example of how bilingual communication is difficult, because if you read in Arabic, you're going in one way, if you're reading in French, you're going the other way. So bilingual communication is always, gets these practical problems that are difficult. And I show another kind of, this is our previous queen in Holland, and like many queens, she's branded with the hats, right? She has a special hat thing going on. And for every occasion, they design her own special hat. So when she went to the Middle East, they worked on combining East and West, combining the hat, combining the scarf, but doesn't work that easily. Right? You can't just mix two things and put them together. And again, another one I showed is, of course, the Zaha Hadid design for the stadium of the World Cup in Qatar in 2020, which also caused a lot of problems in the Arab world because people saw it in a different perspective. And I show these not to criticize design, but actually to show that it's so difficult in the Arab world to escape a lot of different factors: politics, religion, conservatism, and that's part of it. Actually, that's part of the difficulties of it. Mirko Ilic curated this beautiful exhibition on tolerance, and he invited designers from all over the world to make posters on tolerance, and I was so glad to be part of it. I show some of the other participating designers who were part of it. It's an outdoor poster exhibition. It's turning around the world, where posters reflecting designers' opinion on tolerance are showcased and often displayed in very creative ways, like in projections in different areas. Or actually, this was a super cool outdoor exhibition in the university campus where I think it was called The Path of Tolerance, and all the posters were printed were printed on the floor actually in one path across campus. So super cool project that, when I was asked to design it, I took the concept of replacing the fear of the unknown with curiosity. And I played on all the aspects of Middle Eastern or Islamic culture that are always too scary, especially the traditional calligraphy and exaggerated in how of old style it is. The veil which we wrapped the complete face with it to kind of exaggerate it. And the opening of the exhibition was in Slovenia, I think the very first one, and the poster did not survive the first day, which again, I took it as the greatest compliment. But it was also very interesting to see all the artists who like interfered to fill in the negative space of it and sort of imagined the intolerant being kind of pissed off by a tolerance message. But again, I show this also to show that there's always this problem thrown in the mix of religion, politics, that comes as an added layer of difficulty when dealing with Arabic. Arabic lettering is part of what I enjoy working most with, actually. Here it is, one word. This was for a poster series for Paula Scher's lecture in one of the universities, and we took Paula's name and kind of like played with it and expressed it in every possible way. And that's the beauty of it. You can just take any word and endlessly work with it. And in branding, we use it a lot. We've recently designed these wine bottles for Domain Worthy in Lebanon, and we took just the word worthy and explored it in a vertical way, inspired sort of by the grapes that are done for the wine. And that's part of sort of the creative part that never ends. And definitely in branding it comes handy, because when we are designing, again, we are always trying to take the typographic approach. These are samples from the design proposal we did for Al Mamlaka TV station, news station in Jordan. And again, with design and with lettering as well, is when you can design something 1,000 times and still keep designing to reach the solution we want. So I'm just showing samples of the multiple options we showed, and how do we incorporate lettering actually in our branding process and in exploring possibilities for designing the word. I will skip on this because it can go forever. But with lettering, what was interesting is that I started doing these workshops early on, because we didn't get really lettering sort of classes. We got typography, we got calligraphy, maybe we got type design. After that, lettering, we really didn't get that at university. So I started doing these workshops across the Arab world since 2008 until now, where I work with students on just lettering exercise for hours. And it's interesting because in lettering, what you can do is sort of mix calligraphic styles in one word. You can break the rules that calligraphy sets for you, and hence you can end up with so many different possibilities. And I show a lot of my student work. These were workshops done in Iran, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Algeria, Morocco. Basically, what makes it very difficult to come to the States now, because I have all these countries that I visited that seems like super scary for anyone who sees it. But you can see how lettering can be illustrative, even it can be more narrative, and it doesn't need particularly calligraphic skills or good design skills. You can just work with what you have, and you basically dress the skeleton of the letter to give it any particular shape you want. Type design finally is what I guess is the last part of my talk. I started my career with this computer, the coolest one ever, and I had 10 Arabic fonts on this computer. Not that they were all good. I think one was good, the XT Lustra or something like this, and that's it. So I got into type design because I didn't have enough fonts. Can you imagine being a designer working in branding and you have 10 fonts? Like, everything looks the same. So when projects started coming, when I had to design a newspaper, it kind of like, we're doing the logo, they want something very bold, very present. Yeah, it doesn't exist. I have to draw it. And then we draw the logo, and then they say, oh, we want this as our font. So I was kind of forced into type design. And eventually it became a main part of our work in branding, in the context of branding, because every typeface, like every brand needs a voice. And when we did the Mathaf, for example, the Museum of Modern Art in Qatar, we worked on developing a typeface that's really like handwritten and sort of the signature of the artist. And we started doing this, to make the Latin and the Arabic look similar. And exactly what I said, the typeface is the voice of the brand, and every brand needs a unique voice. You can't use the same font to brand an airline and a falafel shop and like a Nike store. So we found ourselves, getting more and more into this, getting more commissions to do typefaces, Arabic typefaces. We've done typefaces for Apple, I'm showing here. But then it was more interesting to start creating our own typeface. Because we are a branding studio, we started knowing what kind of typefaces are missing from the market. I know, like, I'm doing this project and I'm missing this kind of specific typeface with this exact characteristic or feel or personality. So what became more interesting when we had the possibility to kind of do our own typefaces and then have clients come and purchase it. And so, you know, an example, I always found that there was a lack of finding a nice rounded typefaces. Very simple. Not reinventing the wheel, just the typeface was rounded feature that can be used for example, in branding for sort of a friendly personality and approach. So we'll work on this and we'll develop a typeface. Very important for us, it's in Latin and Arabic, that's available in multiple weights. The things that I really miss as a designer. So I'm showing the DCN Arabic type family, for example. And then from there, what we enjoyed so much doing is like spinning display typefaces out of it. Because again, I feel that the Arabic type library is missing so much display typefaces with strong personalities like this. Really, how can we do, for example, an inline typeface and have it both in Arabic and Latin, and have it available for us to use and for other designers to use it. So there was a spin on the sort of on the first BCN typeface. Again, another version of it, doing it with how it would be if it was dotted font. And I remember Matthew Carter telling us it's never a finished typeface, it's an abandoned typeface, like you never stop working on a typeface. So we are good in kind of abandoning typefaces. We give ourselves, we have 2 months, we have 3 months, we have 1 year, we give ourselves a time and we work within that. And again, maybe that's part of us as a studio being very realistic, being very entrepreneurial, you know. I think in design you can work on anything forever. Like I could have stayed now for 3 months preparing this lecture, and then I decide like, no, I have only 5 hours, I have to do it. And maybe that's part of the entrepreneurial education we got at SVA, I think, because it was quite realistic in terms of like, you're a designer, you need to make money, you need to manage your time, you need to balance this. And that's what it's very important actually as part of my practice, and I think that's why we've been doing this for 20 years. Some of the fonts also are inspired by history. I showed the work of Mahideen al-Labad. Part of my research on him, I showed that he did a typeface for the Kitab fi Jarida publication, which I found amazing as a font. And I looked at all his studies and so on, and it's kind of frustrating that this font is not there for us to use. So we kind of revived it and went through this whole process of being inspired by the typeface they did, redraw it, we do it differently, do it in multiple weights, and now we're in the process of adding the Latin to it as well. The street has always been an inspiration, so definitely we also explored doing a Roccat typeface, which is the most used script that you see in Beirut on handmade street signs. And again, we were inspired by Roccat, worked with it calligraphically, tried to simplify it, and develop a typeface that sort of has all the casual feeling of a Roccat script, but it's a little bit more graphic, more elegant, and more systemized to be on the baseline and much simpler. And we did 2 versions of it: the Roccat regular, which had more sharp cuts, and this is only for Arabic speaking. And then we started. I feel like I was thinking at one point, what can we use somewhere in the news every day in Lebanon that would be applicable? It literally says we are a stupid population. Yeah, stupidest population. So if you put this on the cover of a newspaper in Lebanon every day, it will work, I think. And again, we started developing sort of display variations of the Roccat textures that we developed and textures of the font. And again, these kind of sort of simple, my opinion, simple variation on typefaces that I just don't have in my type library and that I would like to have and I would like to use more. The last font I will show is one typeface we really enjoyed working on and took our time working on it, Kermes Arabic. Yeah, it was again sort of the brief was defined through our work. What is missing? What kind of font we are missing? And literally, we'd be working on a project and saying, "I wish I had a typeface with these characteristics." And then I start taking notes of these and put them together when we are finally having the time and the chance to design our own typeface. Let's see. And yeah, I think the best part is when you actually use the typeface in projects. That's for me when it comes to its translation to a practical solution. We've designed recently this first Arabic newspaper in Ohio in Arabic, and we've used the typeface for it. And now we still develop the custom fonts, but we distribute our retail fonts through ArabicTypography.com. I'll conclude a little bit with some reflection on running your own design studio. Running a design studio is a lifelong challenge. Waking up every day and trying to deal with a million different challenges. How do you deal with absurd client briefs? How do you deal with bad taste? How do you stay active at the studio in the long run? How do you remain in business, manage stress? How do you keep designing and not like design your way out of design? To me, I found it by staying at most a group of 5. The moment we had more than 5 people, I was just losing the design part. It reminds me always of an experience I had at 3 years old in Beirut. You know, in Beirut, you grow up speaking Arabic at home, and at 3 years old, they send you to a French school, and then suddenly everyone is speaking French, and you don't understand anything, and that's how you learn French. So our teacher, I went to 3 years old, and I remember 3 or 4, I think, a teacher told us that today we're going to draw the wind of every single thing. And she asked us, anyone doesn't know what wind means? And as I was about to say, I don't know, everybody was like, yes, of course, and laughing, so I kept quiet. And I said, I'll see what everybody draws on the blackboard, and I'll understand what it is. So people started drawing like these kind of things, and I was like, what the hell is this thing? So I decided to go and draw a circle. So I went out, and I drew my little perfect circle, and then the teacher was like, she just went crazy that I'm a genius. Like she said, you just got it. Because that's exactly what I drew, and that was her kind of like abstraction of the wind, like circular things. So she went and told my parents that I'm like really talented in drawing and all that. And I had no clue what was going on. I had no clue. What did I draw? Why was it good? And this is how I feel running a design studio. This is exactly so. I get people telling me to do something that I don't understand what it is, and we kind of have to understand it every time. And designers tell you, don't work for bad clients, do your own things. No, I think you have to pay your dues and working a lot for bad clients, bad projects, bad feedback, because that's how you get to understand what you can do, what you're good at, and that's how you kind of you're able not to work for bad clients. Because talent alone is by far not enough nowadays. You can't just be a talented designer, and that's enough. You have talent, you have soft skills, and you have your passion. Soft skills are everything not related to design, technology, sales skills, management skills, business skills. That really makes the big difference, honestly, if you're running a small design studio. And passion is everything that keeps you going and keeps you wanting to do more and be more competitive and achieve more and raise the level. So talent is good, practice is better, but of course passion is best. And you will always have to juggle between being an artist and an entrepreneur. And again, that's what I think I learned the most at SBA, like how to be realistic and manage this. Be a designer, have the passion of an artist, but make the money of a businessman, and really try to achieve both these. This is us in the office. We're a group of 4 to 5 people maximum. We kind of love what we do. We think we have our approach on it that might be different. We have all the Egyptian posters behind us. That you can look at these. And before we launch a big project, that's how we feel, because we started with the years getting big projects, and the bigger the project, the more, suddenly the project is out, and suddenly everybody in the world has his opinion about it, when we did not really ask. And so we also learned how to deal with this, and I also learned not to take it personal. I think every designer has his own vision, background, and you build it from your experiences, from your education, from your interests, from your travel. So design is really a point of view, and I'm totally fine to have designers with different point of views. So I'm kind of happy when people like the design or don't like design or generate a discussion about it, because I started at a time where there was no discussion about design. So I'm very happy anytime there is a discussion on design. Thank you. Thank you.
We're also going to have people asking questions
So thank you, Tarek. That was, again, amazing. Thank you. So I will come sit with you, and so I have a lot of questions for the panel, but I think I would like to start with the audience questions, and then if there is a little bit of a gap, then I can interject. So who would like? And when you ask the question, we'd like you to come up here. Sorry, yeah, don't worry too much. It's just because we're on Facebook Live and we need to have no echoes, and for technical reasons, we're gonna have you come up to us. Don't worry, it's fine. And yeah, just also let us know who you would like to give the question to. So who would like to? Anyone has a question? Like, we've intimidated you, right? Like these guys are. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, please come. Okay, so the lady in the green jumper. And yeah, so over here.
And talking to the microphone?
Yes, yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Okay, my question is for Tarek. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. You talked a lot about like bilingual branding, and then you kind of talked about the diversity within the Arab world. And I'm not necessarily focused on the typography or the calligraphy, but I'm curious about how you think about branding for maybe unity or branding for a brand that goes beyond a single border, and how you kind of bring that together. It's a topic I'm currently tackling.
Well, it's actually nowadays, it's never really local. Nowadays, the world became so much smaller that almost with every project, you're kind of designing beyond the borders and beyond the local specific context. So, to a big extent, we kind of like see almost every brand, for example, now is in social media and is reaching so much wider than its local target audience. I think sort of the focus on the bilingual part or the Arabic part is more, to us at least, to get the true personality of the brand, like to use sort of the micro zoom to get the unique personality, but then our kind of branding approach is also very, let's say, general, Western, international. And at the end of the day, kind of we are an office based in Europe, and we have always this as part of our philosophy of being outside the Arab world, actually, to get this critical distance and look at things from an external point of view as well. So we try to use sort of our profile, to tackle this. We see it from abroad, but we have a little bit of the local knowledge, and that's how, for us at least, we try to balance this.
Thank you.
Any other question? Or the next question? So please feel free. Yes, please come. Can you go?
Hey, my question is a little more technical, just because I work with the web. But as typographers, how often are you limited by the web or technologies now, and do you think they are more of a limiting factor, or do they give you more freedom?
Would you like to address this to any particular one of them?
No, I
Shall I? Okay. So. Normally, when there's been new inventions, when it comes to printing or typesetting, often it's been geared towards the Latin script first, and then Arabic came after. So we were always an afterthought, simply because of the nature of where the inventions happened. It makes sense. It's not a question of not liking us enough. It's just a question, the people who invent for their own needs, and then they start to think about other people. However, we've benefited from a couple of, the opposite of the abortions that Bahia spoke about. There's been some key milestones in technical development that have benefited Arabic a lot. One of them is the invention or the establishment of the Unicode standard, by which every letter has the unique code, and that enabled us to communicate in Arabic by email, on the web, and by text messaging or what else. Without any problems. When we were studying graphic design, if you send an email from a Mac to a PC in Arabic, you can't read it. So there was no compatibility of text between different platforms, and we are not in that situation anymore. The other good thing that happened was the creation of the OpenType font format, which allowed for more complexity in the representation of text. And that again benefited Arabic a lot, even though it was not primarily only for Arabic, but we were one of the primary beneficiaries of that technology because it allows for the complexity, it allows for a larger character set, and if we want that complexity, then we're fine and being able to have it. Then finally, there was one bit of technical development that happened instantaneously for all of us. It was the first time that something amazing happens and Arabic is on it immediately, and that was the web fonts. And the adoption of the the web font format, etc., starting 2009 and up until today, and that again allowed us to have custom fonts or other more font options on the web. Before we used to rely on system fonts, and system fonts in Latin were restricted. In Arabic there was one or two at most, and lousy between Giza on Mac and then. The other ones on the PC, and it was a disaster. So now with web fonts, we can have really good typography online as well in Arabic. So the challenges that we have today, technically, one, that we still don't have enough fonts, and also as a discipline of designing for the web in Arabic as UX and UI and all of that, we're still playing catch up. We don't have places where we can really go read about how do you design an interactive site in Arabic with the different reading direction and the different requirements of the Arabic script. All of these things are missing. So from a technical point of view, we're sort of okay now, but there is also a little bit of a gap in know-how when we are in the Middle East. Like every time I don't know what's happening with this. Every time I travel home, I feel like, okay, we're going a little bit back in history, because the understanding of the latest technology is not there. So we need to work on that as well. So things are not catastrophically, like of all the horrible things that are currently going on in the Middle East, technology is quite okay. So at least there's a little bit of hope. There are more type designers, there are more graphic designers working, and so, yeah, sorry, that was a very long answer, but anyway, yeah, thank you. So any other question? That was a question? No, that was someone leaving. Okay. Okay, so while you guys think of the next question, I have a question for Bahia. When we're looking at the history of Arab graphic design, there seems to be a little bit of a gap around the 80s and the 90s, and even a little bit of the early 2000s, where suddenly that shift in technology somehow lost us something. When we were studying graphic design, like what Tarek was said, all of this rich history was not accessible to us. Would you like to maybe expand a little bit on that? Like what happened? Why do you think that happened? Is there any way that we can, other than all of us buying your book, which we're all going to do, I think, what can we do to sort of link up contemporary Arabic graphic design with the richness of the history that we've had?
You cannot dissociate design from politics, and that's the fastest answer I have for you is that think about it. You started in the post-colonial condition, already traumatic history, dealing with new identities and modernity, finding a language that is yours. Are we ancient Egyptian? Are we pharaohs? Are we Phoenicians? Are we... So it's all that these questions, these big questions started coming out in post-colonial Arab world. Then suddenly people are being thrown out of their country. You have mass migration of the Palestinians all over the Arab world. Suddenly war in Iraq, suddenly civil war in Lebanon, revolutions. So this unrest is definitely linked to loss of archives, loss of continuity. It's like every time you're cutting a tree and it has to grow back out. So the roots are there somewhere, we just need to find the roots. But I think the tree is thriving now, it's wonderful.
So again, another hopeful, at least something good to look at. Okay, has anyone thought of any question? Yes, please.
Thank you, it was super illuminating. Tarek, you had kind of made reference to like Farsi language designers, and I'm curious for folks who are, designing in Arabic, which obviously shares an alphabet with Farsi and with Urdu and a lot of other, Arabic similar alphabets. So I'd be curious to hear kind of the challenges that you're experiencing are probably similarly felt by, Iranian or Pakistani designers. So kind of what's the collaboration look like, and how it's kind of building beyond just within the Arabic language. It's not really a question.
From my opinion, it's a lot of the challenges were always similar, particularly technical ones, and when it comes to type design as well. But I think culturally there's so much differences that we were really in with different challenges on the other hand. I think sort of culture and your environment affects a lot of your taste of how you consume typography. So it always fascinated me at some point if I'm working with sort of Arab clients or Iranian clients, like the basic terminology would be very different of what they consider a modern typeface or a classic typeface. They would be really like completely opposite. Like I remember when I worked for BBC, actually first we worked for BBC Arabic and then for BBC Farsi, and the brief was the same, but the outcome had like nothing to do with each other because the vocabulary of defining the visual, of consuming the typography is very different. That's very briefly my input.
So what would, follow-up question on that. So what would be modern, like, what would a modern typeface by Iranian perspective look like?
At least at the time, because it's also changing rapidly. I think within the Arab world, what we considered like sort of modern 10 years ago is very different than now. And I think actually because the Iranians were ahead of us in sort of design, they were where we are now. Like how we would define now what's a modern typeface compared to like 2006, let's say, when GE was considered like sort of a newcomer. They have much more value for classical calligraphy and sort of modernizing the classical but staying true to it. Yeah. Which is a bit more true, I think, because if I look at the results we did for BBC Arabic and Farsi, sort of the Farsi lived longer and the Arabic was a trend that came and left very quickly.
Thank you.
That Arabic is actually used by 28 languages, and the designer who's also working with that problem a lot is Ma'mun Sa'al. He's the one venturing into the unknown language is common for everyone. So if you're interested, just check out his website also.
And he's speaking here March 19, so he's well represented. Yes, he's amazing. Also, if you come early, we will be giving like a portfolio review and type credit, or just come and chat. We'll be here before the session. And the invitation is open to everyone, obviously. Any other question? Yes, please.
Hi. One of the biggest things in our literature, movies, content is the idea of identity, huwiyya. And I wanted to ask, you've all presented things that have influenced your work. I wanted to know if there was anything in the practice or the philosophy or the view of design that have influenced you as a person. Doesn't have to be anything like really personal, but just something that you felt like was a shift in how you saw the world, or how you saw yourself as someone who was Middle Eastern and someone who went back and forth between two different parts of the world.
It's open for the content?
Who would like to?
Yeah, I think, Tala should have. You're welcome.
For me, I always thought of design as the service, most of all. It's a way of communicating, it's a way of simplifying information for other people. And for me, it's how you use that tool in a way that serves some sort of purpose. I particularly enjoy editorial design personally. I think, I enjoy working with writers, with editors, with people who usually like to express themselves with words. And for me, my biggest pleasure doing graphic design is to try to work with them to find visual solutions that can help their messages get across in maybe different ways, in ways that reaches more people, in ways that I would like to enjoy reading as well. So creating visual solutions to ideas, to text, to data, which I think is very important right now, to share information. We were talking about visualizing Palestine earlier, which I think is a great tool to spread information, to take complex information, make it available to people. And for me, graphic design is really that, is to how you can present information to people in an accessible way. So you have to use it sort of wisely. Yeah.
What inspires me, or what inspires, I think for me it was the revolution actually. It's living through the Egyptian revolution was life changing. And the way data was consumed at the time, with suddenly the news feed is full of things happening on the street, and you have a parallel universe of a TV playing pictures of the Nile and the peaceful place when people were actually being shot on the street. And to me that completely turned my world upside down. So for me, what drives my work is still the revolution.
Thank you. So before I take a question from the audience, I have a question that I've been keeping on my mind for Tala since your presentation. So you were showing in some posters that they would have multiple versions, often for like Cairo. Like I was noticing like which markets, and there was often like Cairo and a Beirut version. Did you notice a specific trend as to what instances require different versions, or were there specific design requirements for one or the other? Was it the flavor? Like, could you perhaps like give us a little bit more insight on that?
I mean, there were two things. One of them, aesthetically, you can notice sort of the difference between two, as we spoke technically. The Egyptian posters were more, had a hand quality in them, they were hand-drawn, versus the Beirut posters that were relying more on photo montages and actual images of the artists. So that was technically, but on the other hand, there wasn't really, it's mostly something that distribution companies would know about, what sells more in Cairo at this particular time versus what sells more in Beirut at this particular time. Some posters were purely typographic, they just had a nice pattern, versus other audiences would need to have the floating heads, as we call them, the faces of the stars on the poster. So I think it really depended on where it was showing, when it was showing, and it's really satisfying trends and tastes in different places.
So, any other question? Do we have time?
One more
question. So the last question, would anyone like to have that mantle to carry? Okay, so it'll have to be... Okay, yes, excellent, good. Doesn't have to be me. I did not have a question ready. So.
Thank you so much. My question is for Bahia. I'm familiar with your earlier work, your stencils, and I understand that you were really careful in your recontextualization of those ligatures for the streets and the messages that you were saying. So I'm really interested in your new work, the global work with the poetry, and the design choices that you've made for those pieces.
Actually, we have the book here, which is very kind of them, so it's outside, you can have a look at it. And in it, I documented the process because many of these walls are gone now. Some of them were illegal, so they're not there. What started as the first poem with the dream, the corner of a dream, started developing when I could connect with the community. I asked them what's relevant. So Antwerp, we actually asked around for what poem the city wants. So we created a questionnaire a month in advance. We gave it around. We got answers. I talked to the curators. So it became a process of involving different parts of the city. We had the cultural attaché of the mayor come and paint the wall. So for me, it's not really about the design, it's really about the community building and building bridges between societies, identities, and the walls have amazing conversations taking place. Somebody from Iran talks to somebody from Brazil. They're just passing through the city. Somebody living on that street but has never talked to their neighbors. We play music all night. We have soup kitchens. In Lincoln, we had the Muslim women of Lincoln, the YMCA, and the student union come and paint on the wall with us all together. So the design is important, and I put a lot of effort into it. And some of them are 30 meters wide. But to me, what's really more important is the communities and the conversations that take place around the wall. We receive hate mail in Lincoln. Some people were very upset that we have a Palestinian poet up painted in black and red. They found it offensive. And I think it's very healthy because then it gives us a chance to talk about it. But for the design, you saw, I'm always playing with what Arabic means, what Arabic looks like, and how Arabic is perceived by a foreigner eye, an eye that doesn't read it.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we don't have more time for questions. So this is it for our speakers. Please join me. We're not going to leave. We're going to thank them, and then I need to talk to you guys still for one more minute. But please help me thank Tala, Bahia, and Tarek for these amazing presentations. This was unbelievably brilliant. Our journey with Arabic typography and graphic design doesn't stop today. We have still more things for us to do together. On March 19th, so in a little bit less than 2 weeks, we will have, you've heard about him today, you heard about him in the previous panel, Ma'mun Sakal, one of the most amazing people you could ever meet working with Arabic. He's a brilliant calligrapher, brilliant type designer, understands technology, really, really nice person. He's here, he will be speaking here, sharing his work and his journey. We'll hopefully maybe have Dave, but we're not sure. It's all Google related rules on how to attend events, and but we will have also Stephen Coles from Letterform Archive who will be bringing material. So you can sign up for portfolio review, come talk to us and have feedback. It will be before the session. And then on the Saturday after, so in exactly 2 weeks, on March 21, we will have a few sessions with Stephen where you can come and actually touch the books by hand. And this is very important, and I cannot recommend this enough, because the first time I went to the Letterform Archive was a month ago in San Francisco. And it was the first time in my hand, I was in my life where I was actually able to touch by hand Arabic calligraphy written on vellum. And this was like a very old calligraphy written on vellum, and like it's nice to see it. I've seen hundreds of reproductions in books. It's not the same as when you see the actual material. There is richness in handling, and they let you touch them. Like, don't spit on them, but like you can touch them. And I cannot believe how generous they are. They're amazing. So they're bringing some of the collection. Some of it is Arabic, others not at all. So it's a really nice journey through the world of letterforms around the world. Thanks to the Letterform Archive. They will be here on Saturday. Really sign up. This is, you can go to libraries and look at these things, and they will be in a glass box and you cannot touch them. So for you to be really able to get a hand on them, come on the Saturday, and I hope to see you on Thursday. I hope to see you on Saturday. Thank you again for the panelists. Thank you again for the Center for Book Arts for their hospitality and bringing us together. And I hope this is, the first few steps, as Corina was saying, of a much longer journey. Thank you all.